Hello everyone. I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the Graystone Society to our event tonight, A Living History of Rebecca Lukens, presented by Susannah Brody, who has her Master's in Oral Traditions. If you'd like to know more about Susannah and her living histories, we have brochures up at the desk where you registered. I know she does her program at a lot of places, so if you would like to get her for one of your events, you definitely should check her out. And she is also a book writer, and she's written many books, one of which we sell here in the store. And this is her most recent book on Chester County, which I've read and is very good. I would recommend. Also tonight, for $20, we are selling our DVD from our PBS special on Rebecca Lukens. All the proceeds from this DVD go to restoring the Brandywine Mansion, which was Rebecca's home that she lived and died in. So without further ado, welcome to our program.
I love this room. It once held husband and children and rang with the glad and merry laughter of happy childhood. The grave has claimed them all in their young beauty, all but my two dear daughters. I live in a world of my own, and though tears will flow at the images my memory presents, yet I love to linger even amid the wreck of my buried joys, and remember times long gone. My earliest memories of childhood abound with my father's indulgence. My father, Isaac Pennock, was a kind and generous man. I was the eldest daughter, and his affection was fondly lavished on me. Every innocent amusement was allowed me. Why, I bounded over hill and dale, as free and joyous and carefree as youth would permit. It was a time when I neither knew nor feared misfortune. I began to learn about iron at an early age. For my father owned the Federal Slitting Mill and later the Brandywine Ironworks and Nail Factory. He permitted me to accompany him on business trips, an activity that caused my mother much distress. At the age of 12, I was sent away to boarding school. Here, a whole new world opened for me. I was rapidly improving in my studies, a favorite of my teachers and at the head of my class. For 6 years, the educational world was explored with enthusiasm. I was young, ardent, and happy. Books I read, or rather, eagerly devoured their contents. Stories of Hotzeban and Lewis were of intense interest. Shakespeare opened the noblest feelings in my heart. Had I been more select, I believe it might have been a great advantage to me. But with no one to guide my reading or offer me advice in selection, I have devoted my life to reading everything that fell in my path. I was 18 when I returned home after my final school year. My mother was most anxious that I assist her and learn the duties of family. My brother George, who was then just a toddler, was often put in my care. But after several weeks at home, I prepared to attend my father on a business trip to Philadelphia. The visit to the city was a delightful one. During the course of my stay, a friend of my mother's, Mrs. W., paid a call and introduced me to her companion, a young doctor named Charles Lukens. Dr. Lukens was above the common height. An air of grace and dignity were blended into his form. His hair was the deepest shade of black, his eyes hazel, his other features remarkably handsome. After they departed, my thoughts continued to return to the conversation with the young doctor with an interest I could not at that time explain. That spring gave way to early summer, and nature wore her gayest garb. I recall I was sitting by the window. I had just put down Scott's fascinating Lady of the Lake, which had claimed my attention for some time. Enjoying a glorious sunset, I was so lost in my own reverie that I didn't hear approaching footsteps until Mrs. W. startled me with her greeting. Her husband and Dr. Lukens were with her. The next few days were given to the duties of hospitality. Often in the evenings, we strolled along the stream that traversed our property, and I ever found Dr. Lukens by my side. At length, he spoke to me, seeking to express his feelings. "My dear Rebecca, I must return to the city in the morning. The duties of my medical practice make it necessary. But will I be remembered in thy thoughts? Say then, dear Rebecca, might I win thy love?" Surprise and diffidence kept me at first silent, but a lengthy discourse followed. And when all was spoken, all was understood, our plighted faith freely exchanged. I was happy, I, the happiest of happy. My heart beat with a painful quickness. Dr. Lukens and I were married at Fallowfield Meeting on March 25th, 1813. My father persuaded my new husband to go into partnership with him at the Federal Slitting Mill. Dr. Lukens had some concerns about leaving his medical practice, but truly he had fallen in love with rural Chester County. And he was, I think, reluctant to remove me too far from my childhood home. A great joy came to us in August 1814 with the birth of our first child, Martha. In 1815, my father began to urge us to come here to Brandywine, indicating that we could pay a small rent with the understanding that when my father passed away, he would leave the ironworks to me. We concluded to come late in 1816, about the time our second child, Elizabeth, was born. Everything was in dilapidated condition about the mill, house, and farm. Repairs were much needed, and we bore the whole expense ourselves. I often said to my father, I thought it scarce right that we should have so much to do, that the ironworks should have been put in good working order before we came. My father's reply invariably was, what you are doing now will benefit both of you in the future, for when I am gone, this ironworks will be yours. The following year, we had a third child, Charles. And Dr. Lukens commenced the boilerplate business. Now, this was quite risky, for it was a whole new branch of the iron industry, but he had high hopes for its success. Those were difficult times, though. The high costs of repairs and refitting the mill, the natural disasters, but most of all, the deep personal losses. Our son Isaac was born in 1821, but died while still a babe. Isabella was born not long after his death. It was about that same time that the dam that powered the mill was destroyed in a freshet. We had to completely rebuild the dam. We put in new water wheels, new housings, new pinions, new casings. It seemed we were barely recovering when in 1824, my father, Isaac Pennock, died. His will did not clearly state that the ironworks would be mine. He left farms to my two brothers, even though George was still a child. But all the rest of his estate was put in the care of our mother, with a codicil that had been added a few years before he died, indicating that when my sister Mary Ann came of age, the rest of the real estate could be divided among the 4 daughters. As the eldest, I would have first choice, and I could choose the ironworks. In 1825, our son Charles died at the age of 7. His death had a terrible effect on my health. And I soon learned I was expecting another child. Then in June, that same year, I lost my dear and excellent husband and commenced my long, lonely battle with life. This parting by death is a sorrowful thing for those that are left to mourn the loss of what gave them pleasure in life. I will not dwell on my feelings back then. When I looked around me, there was difficulty and danger on every side. An examination of the books exposed some serious deficiencies in the finances. That year came to a kinder close with the birth of my dear Charles Anna, my 6th child. I was left with 4 daughters and a promise I made to my dying husband. Charles asked me to continue with the ironworks, and I promised to comply. I think I must have possessed some energy of character, for I look back on it now and wonder at my daring. My mother thought as a female I was unfit to carry on such a concern. She thought I should leave Brandywine. But I firmly but respectfully told her I must make the attempt. I urged the promise I made to my husband, the duty I had to my children, and that Brandywine Iron Works would, a short time in the future, be mine according to Father's will. My mother then declared that as she interpreted the will, it was up to her to decide when the property would be divided. She then demanded that I repay her the loan that my husband had on my father's estate. I told her that it would be repaid as soon as practical, along with all the other debts. Between my mother and myself, there has never been that endearing familiarity that ought to exist between parent and child. I can well imagine in her youth she must have possessed many fine attractions. Her intelligence was superior, though her education had been sadly neglected. My mother possessed a vigorous and powerful mind. She thought I should leave Brandywine, that it would be folly for me to remain. Necessity is a stern taskmistress, and my every want gave me courage. Besides, I had made a promise to my husband. And where else were we to go? Back home to Mother? Pennock relatives were reluctant to assist me in this folly. But my husband's younger brother, Solomon, came to my rescue. Dear Solomon, he managed the ironworks and persuaded the workers to stay. He assisted me in dealing with my Pennock relatives, who were themselves interested in taking over the mill. He served as a father to my daughters. Solomon left his own home and concerns to help out in an emergency and stayed for 15 years. He was here when we rebuilt the mill, and he was here for us to offer comfort and support when my daughter Elizabeth died of scarlet fever at the age of 15. More than a year after my sister Marianne came of age, my mother agreed to divide the properties. By that time, I had paid her more than $4,000. Brandywine Iron Works became mine on the condition that I pay my sisters Sarah and Martha $5,000 to equalize their share of real estate with the updated appraisal of Brandywine Iron Works. But By the 1930s, the old mill had just about gone down. It had never really been built correctly to begin with. There was nothing for us to do but rebuild. With Solomon's help, I have built a new mill. I have made repairs to the mansion house here, built substantial tenant houses for my workers, and made improvements to the farm. Not a penny of those expenses came from my mother or my father's estate. I have built a superior mill, though a plain one. Our business is dull enough, and there is competition all around us. But our character for rolling boilerplate stands first in the American market. Beginning in 1837, we did run into some years of economic difficulty, along with the rest of the nation. The whole country was in recession. Cheap, poor quality iron was being imported, leaving home businesses like Brandywine without protective tariffs. My workers marched in protest. Solomon and I offered them support, giving them a time off, even supplying the banners, to no avail. I was concerned about manufacturing too much until the economy became more stable. We had amassed a considerable supply of plate iron. So, we stopped rolling, and I put my men to work, repairing the dam, doing maintenance around the mill, even working on the farm. Anything to keep them employed during this difficult time. It was about the same time that my new neighbors to the north decided to challenge my rights to the dam that powered the mill, and had for 25 years. When all this was resolved, and I looked forward to peace and harmony between family and neighbors, Solomon decided it was time to move on after assisting me for 15 years. The books were in the hands of my daughter Martha, who joined the firm immediately upon finishing her schooling. But once the economy recovered, the business began to grow so quickly, she felt it was too much for her young shoulders. So for a brief time, Martha instead took over the management of my household. Dear Martha, what a joy she has been to her mother. And then Martha fell in love. I was so happy for her when she chose Abraham Gibbons, a young man of sterling character and fine qualities. They were married in 1841. Abraham came to work at the ironworks alongside me. In 1844, my mother, Martha Pennock, passed away. What a shock I had when I learned that my brother George was the primary beneficiary of her estate. George, who squandered his own inheritance and came to my mother time and again for financial assistance. I think it would have broken her heart if she knew and believed the truth about George. Now George is claiming that I received advancements from my father's estate left for the benefit of all the children. He's supported in this by our sister Sarah. How many times must I pay for an ironworks whose value was limited when my husband and I first came here? My mother spent more of her widowhood with me than any of her other children. And although we were never close, I always treated her with kindness and respect. But I have learned of late that there was a dark, a malign influence exerted against me by those around her. And my being prosperous as the mistress of Brandywine was the cause. I tire of these constant struggles, dealing with mill, house, and farm. I worry, have I done enough as a mother for my daughters? They seem content. I must smile when I see how happy Martha is with her Abraham. He has become a partner with the ironworks, and it helped me enormously. In 1848, Isabella married Dr. Charles Houston, and Charles Anna married Dr. William Tingley. Interesting, is it not, that two of my daughters followed my pattern and married physicians from Philadelphia. My youngest, Charles Anna, was determined to marry her young man despite my reservations. Dr. Tingley is not as well grounded as my other sons-in-law. Indeed, he seems to live for the day. Dr. Houston is a fine young man. He has also joined the ironworks as partner, allowing me to finally retire and get some rest. But I fear, having spent all those years in a state of constant excitement, has had a detrimental effect on me. For now, my days all seem to pass in a dreary and monotonous manner. I must push myself out of this lethargy. I had not thought to mention this, but the sorrowful feelings just keep coming up at the most unexpected times. Several months have passed since I lost my dear Charles Anna, and in that time, what sorrow have we seen? She left in my care the darling babe, Annie, whose life was purchased with her own. And dearly do I love my little treasure. Although Dr. Tingley agreed that Charles Anna asked me to care for the baby, I still worried that he might try to interfere. And my concerns turned out to be well-founded. An acquaintance of mine learned by chance that Dr. Tingley was petitioning the Orphans' Court in Philadelphia, seeking full guardianship of his daughter and her estate. I was uncertain what to do, but my brother-in-law, James Penrose, Mary Ann's husband, came to my assistance. "I can tell thee what to do," said he. "Offer Bill Tingley cash for releasing all rights to his child, and he will likely take it. It need not be a large sum either, for he is always out of pocket." And so it was done. I began by offering him $500 for his daughter, and he accepted. How could a father do such a thing to his own child? Would they have done that? Would they? I have a handwritten, signed agreement, witnessed that he has agreed to it. He has seen her occasionally, as we had agreed. We actually hear more from his parents. Little Annie is visiting her paternal grandparents just now. Annie, what a beautiful child she is, and so affectionate. The dark, lustrous eyes of her mother beam at me from her pretty little face. Annie will now be the one to cheer me when I am sad. But I do tire so easily these days. I really must sit and rest until Annie returns. I love this room. It once held husband and children and rang with the glad and merry laughter of happy childhood. Soon, perhaps, it will again.
I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And if you have any questions or you would like to talk to our Rebecca Lukens, feel free to stay afterwards and do so. If you like our programs and you are not yet a member and you would like to support us, membership is at the desk where you signed in. And also, don't forget about this DVD, PBS Special Rebecca Lukens. This room that she talks about, it's in the Brandywine Mansion. We're trying to restore it, so if you'd like to help us out, you can also purchase it online via PayPal if you don't purchase it tonight. Thank you very much.
You got to write it down for a movie. I have a question. Susie, I've heard you do this many times, and the words and the intonation and the flavor and the heartfelt emotion is always so much in place. I'm just curious as to how you prepare for your program.
Well, originally the way I prepared was there were three primary sources that I used. When Rebecca's husband died in 1825, she began to write an autobiography. She felt that he had died young and there wasn't and her children didn't have enough opportunity to really know him. So she started to write the autobiography, and that's where I get the words on how she describes how they met. She only got up to when they got married, and he started working with his father-in-law in the ironworks. And then she got busy with, having a family and whatever. At any rate, another thing that she did was, after she retired, starting in 1849, and particularly after her daughter Charles Anna died from childbirth fever, she began a diary. Now, she only kept it intermittently. She wrote like 2 or 3 days in a row, and then she stopped for a couple months, and then she picked it up again and wrote for a little bit. And she did this over a period of a little more than 2 years. So it's not a very complete diary. Both those times, she was very emotional and very sad and very melancholy. So that's where she gets into the personal expressions. The third important resource, I don't know who typed it, but sometime it was typed on an early typewriter. And it is legal size pages, 6 of them, single-spaced. This was when her little brother George decided, after her mother died, to sue her for the rights to the ironworks. Yet again, other relatives had done it before. And what she had done over the years was she paid her mother, she paid the relatives. She basically bought the ironworks several times. But when her brother did this, she apparently said, enough is enough. And she had this Orthodox Quaker idea that you should resolve your issues without going to court. But she finally, her attorneys took care of it, and they did go to court. And it was 1850 when she finally got full, clear title to the ironworks that she had been running for 25 years. And at that time, and this is my interpretation, I think she finally just said, enough. And her attorney asked her to write down the history of the ironworks and her life and Charles's life as she remembered it. And the Hagley Museum has many of the early surviving records from the iron company here, and that's where that statement came from. But and unfortunately, she refers to some things, like some details about running the iron company at different times. She refers to, so and so has already told you this, so it's not entirely complete, but it does give an overall history. So those were the resources. There were also some letters, not very many, and there were some reminiscences done by her granddaughter in the early 20th century, when her granddaughter was old.
Annie?
No, Annie in fact died when she was 12. One of the Houston daughters is the one that wrote some memories. She remembered her grandmother, and she was an old lady by the time she wrote it, so there's things like that. What I did to begin with is I literally took 3x5 cards, and I would copy off onto a card a sentence that I thought was like pithy so that I could get her words. And when I first started doing this, that's actually what I called this, Rebecca Lukens in her own words, because I developed what I have to say from her words. Now, I have to tell all of you, Deborah, who asked this question, is a storyteller, and she's the one that got me into storytelling. And one of her first principles was, you don't memorize. So sometimes my words from Rebecca are not exactly like if you picked up the diary, you might not find that sentence exactly word for word. But that's how I started, trying to do that. To get the essence of what she has to say. And of course, I'm interpreting Rebecca the way I see it. And some of my favorite things, she says very nicely that between her mother and herself, there's never this endearing familiarity that ought to exist between parent and child. I think that's a nice thing to say. She repeatedly says she treated her mother with kindness and respect. You can tell that they did not have a close attachment. But how about, I imagine in her youth she must have possessed many fine attractions. What kind of a statement is that? I take it to mean not exactly what she's saying, that kind of thing. Rebecca had a very, very challenging life. I think a lot of the time it was not sad, but I think she was very strong-willed. I think she was raised in wealth and had certain expectations. And I think that she was quite determined to do things the way she wanted to do them. But in the process of that, the Lukens Steel Company here, ArcelorMittal, now owned by the largest international steel corporation in the world, is the longest continuously operating ironworks in America. Just celebrated its 200th anniversary. And the iron industry that began in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, before we even were the United States of America, most of those old ironworks never kept up with the new methods. So they faded away, they closed down, and new ones like Bethlehem Steel opened. It is remarkable that not only did this particular company stay in business, but the 25-year time period when Rebecca Lukens ran the ironworks here was the time of enormous change, when the early ironworks were fading away and the new ones were emerging. So she is the one that kept it up. She's the one that kept it going. When I first started doing the research, I read a lot of things where they said that Lukens Steel was named for Dr. Charles Lukens. Well, I'm sure Rebecca would have even said that too, but the fact is, Lukens Steel was named by her two sons-in-law after she retired from the ironworks. And her husband had been dead for more than 25 years by the time it was named Lukens. It wasn't named for Dr. Charles Lukens, it was named for Rebecca. She's the one. Now, the politically correct thing, as Carolyn will probably tell you, is that it was named for both of them. But, no, that's my opinion. It's just, it was a long process in developing. Now, if I haven't done this for a while, I have to pull out my script and kind of refresh a little bit. But as Carolyn mentioned, when I'm doing tours, now that they actually acquired Rebecca's house, it's not restored yet, so when you get a chance to see it, take a look, but it's pretty rough. I can pull out, some little quotes. But
I find though it's very historically correct that your interpretation leaves one with this great affection for Rebecca Lukens, and you just want to know her. You know, I feel when I listen, I want more. I want additional paragraphs. I want to know her.
and there is more.
Even better, because I'm left with this great fondness for Rebecca Lukens, who's been gone how many years now?
100 and, well, she's been gone 155 years.
160 years, yeah. Almost 160. I have a question, Susan. With all the acrimony and conflict that she experienced with members of her family, is that characteristic of the period that she was in?
Somewhat. First of all,
They had a number of different...
now this was not true of all Quaker families. So Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania was actually fortunate because the Quakers believed in educating their women. And for the most part, the women were, if they had a good marriage, they were treated as equals. And the Quaker men, if they had a will, are the ones that would say, I'm leaving everything to my beloved wife. Not so with other cultural groups, particularly. Unfortunately, Dr. Charles Lukens died without a will. And during that time, the majority of people, the woman did not automatically inherit. So some male relative could come in and claim that he was the closest male to whatever the estate was and take control of the businesses. That was not uncommon. Now, an interesting thing happened. I mean, Rebecca faced the complication of the way her father worded the codicil to his will. We pretty much recognize that the intent was that he was giving Rebecca the opportunity to get the Brandywine Iron Works in the way he added that codicil about the properties being divided among the daughters. I think he worded it that way because I think his wife Martha would have had a fit if he had put it in the will, I'm leaving Rebecca, my daughter Rebecca, the Brandywine Iron Works. So he worded it that way so that, you know, she wouldn't get too upset. Then her husband, Rebecca's husband, dies without a will. Now here's what happens. When her mother died in 1844, this is 20 years after her husband had died, she, obviously, the little brother George was the mother's favorite. And he had already run into financial problems repeatedly. She leaves her estate, so she leaves whatever's left to him. But she left it in trust, so he had a yearly income. She was smart enough to know that she wasn't just going to give it to him. And then he, of course, takes Rebecca to court. Rebecca's will is extraordinarily lengthy and complicated. And some of the interesting things, she had an excellent relationship with her two sons-in-law, not Tingley, but Houston and Gibbons. They were executors of her estate along with her brother-in-law, James Penrose, who was an attorney. So those three men were executors of her estate. But she leaves independently to her two daughters she leaves funds directly to them that are not connected with the ironworks at all, with whom she's in partnership with the sons-in-law, and she directs that her executors have no control over those funds. So even though she has her sons-in-laws as partners, she trusts them enough that they are executors of her estate. Her daughters still inherit serious funds for which their husbands have no control unless they choose to do it. Now, this is a woman that has run into numerous difficulties with finances, and she is very careful. The other thing that happened was in 1848, the year that her two younger daughters got married, Pennsylvania legislature passed an inheritance law that actually said if someone dies without a will, their spouse and their children are to inherit their funds. Now you have to understand that Charles Anna married Dr. Tingley, so she's a married woman. But Rebecca's already financed her girls, so they have money independently. When she died from childbirth fever about a month after Annie is born, she died without a will. Her estate, whatever funds Charles Anna had, and unlike most young women of the time, she had funds. Her mother was the wealthiest woman in Chester County. Because of that new law, Dr. Tingley inherited half of Charles Anna's money. Little baby Annie inherited the other half. That's why he went to court. I don't think he really cared about the baby. He wanted control of her money, too. So, Rebecca, over the years, learned some very valuable lessons about money. And that is why I think, in my opinion, her will is so complex. And apparently, neither one of her other sons-in-law had any problem with what she did and how she did it and why she did it. So their wives were independently wealthy, but they were partners in a very successful ironworks. They were wealthy. Now, by the time Rebecca died, Abraham Gibbons had left the partnership. He started one of the first banks in Chester County. So he became a banker. And he left the partnership. He sold out. So Dr. Houston became, and then later his sons became the primary owner of the steel mill. But this is a woman who obviously was very, very smart and educated and learned valuable lessons from any of her trials and tribulations.
Right.
Now, I also have to keep saying, in my opinion, this is my interpretation of Rebecca. Rebecca, in case you haven't noticed, has kind of taken up residence inside. You know, I put on the Quaker black and boy, there she is. She comes out.